Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the live office hours for the School of SweetGeorgia. We come here once a month on the last Thursday of every month at 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time to talk about things to do with the fiber arts. We're going to talk about weaving today. We'll talk a bit about spinning today. Thank you guys so much for being here. I see everybody in the chat. It's very nice to see everybody here this morning. It's a very, very rainy day today. I'm just thinking my kids are doing the pumpkin run today at school and they're going to be running outside in the rain and the mud. It's going to be great. So we have lots and lots of things to talk about today. Basically, what happens on these calls is we talk about upcoming content. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of the community events that are happening. I'll talk about the spinning study group that's happening right now. That's almost done. Very close to being done. I think it's done next week. And then I'll tell you about the next study group that's coming up. We have some questions, not very many questions. We have some questions that we answer for members in here as well. And what else? I think that's it. But basically what we do is this live stream is available for members only. It's an unlisted sort of link, and then you can come here and see what this is all about. And then afterwards, this will get archived in the School of SweetGeorgia, and it will also get archived on our YouTube channel so people can see it later as well. But if you find this at a later date and you wish that you were part of the chat and part of the conversation, then that's where you need to be a member of the School of SweetGeorgia to participate in all of that. Fantastic. Okay, so let's get started. So these are the things that we are planning to talk about today. And you can see that's my beautiful new blanket that I've just recently finished. So let's first talk about the new and upcoming content that we are working on. So next week, next Wednesday, I think it is, we will be releasing that Weaving Twills on 4 Shafts class. We're just finalizing a few last minute things, and then that course will be available on the website. Right now we also are editing the crochet class that Charlotte taught. So that's the very basics of crochet, like how to work with, how to make a chain stitch, what kind of crochet hooks to use, how to make a single crochet, double crochet. And then she goes on into more and more different types of stitches. I think it's half double crochet, treble crochet, and then a puff stitch. And then using all of these things, you can basically make a shawl. So that's fantastic. So that's Charlotte's class that's coming very soon. And then we just also recently filmed the needle felting class with Charlotte. So this needle felting class, you can see here, there's like a bowl full of little balls here. These are all felted, hand felted, needle felted ornaments that you can, attach to a tree, or holiday ornaments, or whatever you would like to do with those. But basically Charlotte shows 3 different ways of forming this ball shape. It's fascinating, and it's also very relaxing to watch because it's just using the needle felting needle, either one needle or multiple needles held together, and then making this punching sound into the wool. And it makes like a little crunchy sound, but it's very soothing. It's very, very soothing. And then you can watch her sort of apply other bits of colored fiber to make different designs, different patterns. This is kind of like the foundations of some of the balls that were going to be made. And then she adds embellishments to them. You can add beads to them. You can add lace trim, so many things. So that's the one that Charlotte's teaching. And then we have 2 classes that we recently filmed with Laura Fry. So I think I might have mentioned it before. Yes, so Laura came into the studio. She came down from Prince George right after Knit City, and we spent a whole week filming classes with Laura. And so these are absolutely fundamental classes that everybody should watch. Like everybody, if you're trying to do any sort of weaving, if you're going to even learn rigid heddle weaving, like all of this stuff is absolutely helpful. So you can see here, there's a photo here where she showed us how she winds a warping board, like winds a warp using a warping board. And we talk about how to position it on the wall, at what height, where she ties the ties, even like in what order she ties the ties. I learned so much about that particular lesson. And she was talking a lot about like body movements as well, to make it really ergonomic, to make it easy on your body so that you don't hurt yourself by working above your shoulders and winding a warp and all that kind of stuff. So that's part of it. And then this amazing photo here, this is a technique that she uses to dress her loom. And so you can see here, there is a reed on top here, and this is what she's using for rough slaying the warp before she puts it onto the loom. And so this whole process is very, very cool. You have to see it in action. So that is really going to be super fun. And then in between, so those classes are coming out in January and February next year. Then in there, we're also going to be doing a weaving class for rigid heddle as well, again with Amanda Wood. So Amanda's actually coming on Monday, and we're going to be filming a class about color and weave. So color and weave is really an amazing thing because you can really just use 2 colors of yarn and then thread them differently in the slots and the holes of the rigid heddle loom. And then when you alternate 2 shuttles, you can produce all sorts of patterns, all sorts of patterns. Like if you've ever seen woven log cabin, it looks like a grid. So you have like dark and light lines going this way and dark and light lines going this way. And so many color effects are possible using just plain weave and 2 colors of yarn. So Amanda's going to go through some of that, and that will be very, very exciting. Congratulations, Alana, you just got a new warping board. Fantastic. So much weaving to happen soon. Yeah, log cabin is beautiful. You can use it for everything from like dish towels to scarves to blankets. You can use it at different scales, different gauges. So many things are possible. So those are the classes that are coming up in the next very short while. And after this sort of bunch of weaving courses, you know, in the spring, we also do more knitting classes. We also actually have a class, which is not on the list here, but we have a class that's going to be about fixing brioche mistakes, and that's going to be done with Matt. And then we also have some other classes coming up in the spring. So we'll talk about the knitting stuff probably in the next time that we meet for the live office hours. So events, we have so many events now. So right now, you guys know that we do a couple of meetups throughout the month. So we try to space these out so that they are available for everybody at different times of the day, different days of the week, all sorts of things like that. So on the 1st and 3rd Tuesday of every month, there is a 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time meetup with Robin. She's one of our moderators in the community. And so she does a knitting meetup on those days. And then on Thursdays, there's a knit night that happens on the 2nd and 4th Thursday, 7 p.m. with Charlotte. And if you are a new member coming to that particular session, you can just come like 10, 15 minutes early just to sort of introduce yourself and things like that. This Sunday is going to be now twice a month. The Saturday is going to be twice a month. So there's going to be a first and third Saturday of every month at 12 p.m. PST with Vicky, also one of our moderators. She is here in the chat today, Victoria. So that used to only be once a month. Now we're going to do it twice a month, which is really exciting. And then I have started doing these new member orientation meetings. So that would be on a Monday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So both myself and Vicky are on that call. And that's a very sort of informal call for anybody who's like recently joined the school, anybody who has questions about navigating, getting around, all of that kind of stuff. You're more than welcome to join for that call. And it's not like a presentation, but it's more like a meeting where we're all in the same Zoom room at the same time. And then we have 2 additional meetup times on Wednesdays now. So there's one that's kind of an early one, depending on where you are. So it's called the Wake and Make meetup. This is also with Vicky, 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, which works out to 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, which works out to, I think it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the UK. So you have to check all these times. And then there's one for Making Till Midnight. So 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, so many times to basically meet up and ask your questions, get help, all of this kind of stuff. You can always bring whichever project you're working on. We kind of designate them knits and, spinning and weaving, but you can really bring whatever project you happen to be working on. Now, let's talk about the spinning study group that has been happening since the beginning of September. We are now at almost the very end of this study group, so week 8. Next week is going to be the last week of this study group, and so there is a final spinning finale meetup. So that's going to be with Greta and Vicky, and this one will be recorded just in case anybody can't make it and wants to see what everybody did. But this spinning finale meetup will be a nice way for everybody to share sort of the highlights of what they've learned during this study group time. It's been very, very intense. If you go into the study group area of the community, you can see you can go under the community, and then there's these groups. You can find the spinning study group, and people have been posting their threads of what they've been working on, all the exercises that they've been doing, photographs of the samples that they've been working on. So I'm going to share with you a couple of the threads that have been happening. So you can see here, this is actually Vicky's photo of her samples of her doing soaked wool versus unsoaked fiber, and seeing what the difference is between the two. So a lot of intentional practice, intentional spinning and sampling has been happening. And so I wanted to highlight just a couple of threads here because there's so many, there's a lot of stuff happening. But I wanted to highlight a couple of these because they have really, really good illustrations of what has been going on. And also here, like for Vicky's thread here, for Vicky's spin study, there's a really good conversation about plying through the rings, what that's all about. And so Kim McKenna, the instructor for that class that we have, the Nuances to Spinning Better Yarns, where she teaches this plying through the rings method, Kim goes into more detail, sort of explaining a little bit more about plying through the rings, how you can do it, all of these kinds of things. There's also Amanda B's thread, and she has been following along and doing a lot of weekly exercises, so spinning mindfully, taking photos of that work, just spinning through a lot of the different exercises and showing examples of that. Jenny H, I put her thread here because she has some very good photographs that she's taken of fiber that was soaked and unsoaked, and you can very clearly see the difference in the texture of the wool after it's been washed. And so she has kind of like a photo where she's taken the two pieces of fiber and held them up against a window so you can really see how they've changed. And then out of those two fibers, then she spun a whole bunch of samples, so you can follow along with that. Then Charisse S, her notes here, she's actually been doing many of the worksheets from the Spinning Up a Level class, and that's the one that we had with Katrina Stewart and Crafty Jacks, and that one has sort of practicing different drafting methods. So you can use like a woolen preparation and then do different drafting methods, then use a worsted preparation and do different drafting methods, and then take samples of each one and put those on a card. And so Charisse has been doing that. Now, I wanted to post her her thread here because she has some sort of DIY combs. They weren't really designated as wool combs. She's found some combs that I believe are used for scraping honey from honeycombs. And so she has a photo of that and what she's used to comb her wool. Because, you know, you can make do with a lot of things if you don't happen to have designated wool combs. So that one was very cool. And then Julie S, she is also making the night shift shawl, as I am as well. And there's just a ton of photos there of her plying and things like that. So I want to encourage you guys to look at that. Now, I want to very quickly share with you the fiber that I was spinning and the sort of the progress that I've been making on my spinning study group. Let's see here. These are my skeins that I just recently plied. So I basically have done, so my goal originally was to make 6 skeins of yarn, each one 50 grams. And I was doing all sorts of color, basically separating out the colors so that I can get a gradient or almost a gradient for each one of these skeins. And I have done 4 skeins already. This is a 2-ply. This is not what I want, but this is, I'm mainly focusing on the 3-ply and trying to get those 3-ply yarns to be as close to worsted as possible. These ones haven't been washed yet. I've just wound them off of the storage bobbin. So basically the idea was that I took all of my took all of my singles, spun them consecutively to one bobbin, and then separated them off by rewinding them onto storage bobbins like so, and then took the 3 storage bobbins and then plied them into a 3-ply using the e-spinner. So the e-spinner makes it very, very efficient to ply. So all of the singles were spun on a Saxony wheel, double treadle, Saxony wheel, and then plied together. And this is where I'm at so far. I just have to make this into a skein, and then I have 2 more skeins to make after that. Purple on the bobbin. Thank you so much, Tanya. I actually don't remember what the color looks like, so I'll have to once I skein this off, then I'll remember. I'll see what it was. I basically took the fiber and split it into 3, divided it into 3, and tried to spin each third to a bobbin and ply them together to get the colors to match up again. But for some reason, I think I must have messed up with these particular plies, but this one, the turquoise never plied back on itself. Like the turquoise never aligned again. So I think that I must have split this one incorrectly by accident. I think I was just really excited about spinning these colors. I like it. So that is what I was working on. Yeah. So if you guys are still working on the spinning study group, I know that it was very, very intense. There's like a lot of study that's happening right now. And so it's totally fine if you're not finished. I'm spinning these right now, but theoretically, the whole study group was about sampling in order to get to the point where you're starting to spin for your project. I just started to spin for my project before all that because I was extra eager. But you can absolutely just do this at your own pace. You're not behind if you're not, doing all of the exercises. I also discovered that people in the study group were starting to move off into sort of branching out and going down different rabbit holes depending on what they were most interested in doing. And so if you only wanted to work with woolen and long drop, then you could do that. If you only wanted to do worsted and try to make sock yarn, you could do that. So it was really it's very free form. It was about whatever you wanted to do. So let's talk about the next study group that we're going to be doing. So this is kind of in preparation for the next study group that we're going to be doing in January. But Greta wanted me to remind you that if you wanted to join the weaving study group in January, kind of like where you need to be or where you need to start before you might feel confident or ready to join that study group. So for the spinning study group, what I had recommended was if you were brand new to spinning, we encourage you to watch that spinning from scratch video or the spinning from scratch course. And so that was like if you've never touched a wheel, never touched a spindle, never touched fiber, that's where you start, and then you kind of progress from there. So in this case, because what we're going to be weaving for the weaving study group in January is going to be weaving twills on 4 shafts, you have to sort of start with a 4-shaft loom. So either a table loom or floor loom, and I'll talk about looms in a little bit. But the goal here would just be to put on a really narrow warp like this wide, about 8 inches wide, 7 inches wide, and then use a woolly yarn, something that's not superwash. A worsted weight is really, really easy to work with because it's easier to see, it's bigger, thicker, all of that kind of stuff. And so if you look around, Maurice Brassard makes a really simple yarn. It's called Québécois, and it's a 2-ply yarn. Wool, non-superwash, and it is perfect. It's basically what I learned with as well. So I used Québécois 2-ply wool on a Leclerc Dorothy 4-shaft table loom. And then I would encourage you to work through the projects in it's basically one sampler in the multi-shaft weaving basics class. So work through the multi-shaft weaving basics class, and then also watch some of the essential weaving lessons. So the essential weaving doesn't have a project attached to it, but it's more like concepts about, how do the different looms work, what do different shuttles look like how do you carry weft yarn, what are the different shuttles like, just a bunch of fundamental knowledge, things like how to wind a warp, how to dress a loom from back to front, all sorts of things like that. Sig, if you are allergic to wool, you can definitely use cotton. So when we do the project that's going to be coming up in January, that Twill Gamp, that one is done in cotton, 100% cotton. It's organic cotton. It's 3-2 cotton. It's actually just beam, so you can look for that as well. So if you wanted to, you could do all of the testing and the learning with cotton. That's totally fine as well. It's just that wool has that tendency to full, and it makes for a really interesting transformation after you wash that fiber. Yes. And then just with all of that, you know, after you've set a warp up on your loom, to really just practice. How do you wind a bobbin? How do you make sort of like that valley where you fill in the gap in between on that bobbin? How do you throw a shuttle? You know, throwing underhand. Don't throw overhand, throw underhand. So throw and then catch underhand. So practice throwing your shuttle, practice checking the angle of your weft, practice counting how many picks per inch are on the loom as you go, and so that you can work towards weaving a really, really good 50-50 balanced cloth. And that means that if you have 10 ends per inch on your warp, that you should be also getting 10 picks per inch on your cloth. And so that is all stuff to work through and practice before we get started in January. Next week, the course is going to launch, and that is that. So these two photos here, that's the sampler that's from the multi-shaft weaving basics class. Now, very important, I want to talk to you about documentation. So I know that everybody in the spinning study group has been doing a great job of keeping notes, keeping like control cards, writing down what they've done. It's been fantastic. I know that for myself, I am not great at taking notes. I've mentioned this before, and that's why I wanted to put together a system. And I found that it was even more difficult when I was making these weaving patterns. So you can see this is the pattern that you will be able to download next week to make the blankets from that Weaving Twill class. And as I was putting together this blanket, the pattern for the blanket, I had to go around and look for my notes, because sometimes I would keep my notes in my phone, in a little journal app on my phone. Sometimes I would write it in my bullet journal. Sometimes I would write it on a scrap of paper in the attic. And so trying to collect together all of this information was very challenging. One of the things I would do is I would actually take photos of the cloth with my phone with the measuring tape. So in that photo, you can see like I've measured the gamp, 65 centimeters. And so sometimes I scroll through my phone and I have these photos of my cloth and measurements, but then I forget that they're there. So really, what you want to do is you want to make yourself a weaving record. And there are lots and lots of these kinds of sheets. You can find them in books, you can find them in lots of different places, but here, I'm going to show you the one that I have here. And I have a pen? Yeah. So this is a sheet that you can also download. I'm going to post this up this afternoon, so you can go download it. But the idea is to use one kind of form to record all your information and then keep it together in a big binder. Keep them all together in a binder, okay? Keep them with you always. So here for the blanket project here, we have the date, what the threading is. Okay, this is going to be Rose Path. These are going to be baby blankets for our friends. It's going to be Twill. I'm doing this on the counterbalance on a Mira 2 loom. Happens to be a sinking shed loom. These things, okay, so I'll go through here first because this is easier. So this is the warp yarn. I'm using just beam 3-2 cotton. This is going to be a natural colored warp. I put on about 7 yards sectional. It's going to be 14 ends per inch and then 38 inches in the reed, and therefore 532 ends that I have measured out. And then this includes 2 floating selvages. So you want to make notes of if you used floating selvages or did not. This is good information to include. And then for the weft, for this particular yellow blanket, it's also going to be just beam 3-2 cotton, happens to be dandelion yellow, and then aiming also for 14 picks per inch. So this is where I would weave and I would measure as I go. measure and checking that my picks per inch is correct, my beat is correct, so that I'm getting a good balanced cloth at the end of the day. Now, one thing I have not yet measured is ends per inch after finishing and picks per inch after finishing, because your fabric changes after washing. All of the yarns that were straight will kind of relax and then curve around each other, and so it shrinks the fabric quite significantly. So if you look here, there's measurements, and I did not take measurements on the loom, but I probably should. So the measurements on the loom, you would measure it still while it's not under very, very tight tension, but just like sort of gentle tension. And measure it off the loom would be 35 inches wide by 60 inches long. This is before washing. And then after I washed it, it became 31.5 inches wide and 52 inches long. So this is it's very important information to have, so that the next time you go and plan a project with similar warp and weft, you can use this shrinkage and this take up, all of this calculation can go into your warp calculations for the next project. Then the next thing is down here, I have sort of an area where you can draw your own draft. And so you would put your threading up here, you put your tie up here, and then you put your treadling progression over here. And then you can also learn how to do your own drawdown. So this is where you would kind of color in or fill in the blanks for what shafts are being activated, so that you get a general sense of what your pattern is going to look like at the end of the day. So keep all of this with you as you work. So you can put it on a clipboard, leave it next to the loom, and then after all of the projects are done, then you can archive them into a bigger binder. But keep these with you. So that way, when you go to make measurements, write it down all in the same place. Now, Nancy M is saying, I only have a 36-inch loom. So I did write a whole bunch of things in the pattern here about, like, if you want to, you don't have to make it as a blanket. You can make this exact same pattern and make it into a pillow, or make it into a shawl, or make it into whatever you want to do. So if you have a narrower loom, you can just cut out some repeats and then make something smaller. So totally fine. It just happens that I have this bigger loom and I wanted to make a baby blanket. So that's what I did. So, talking about looms and where to get old looms. Where do you get a 4-shaft loom? So I would suggest that if you have an opportunity to, if you're part of a local guild, sometimes they have equipment that is available for you to rent or borrow. You can borrow equipment from friends if they have stuff that's available to borrow. And then after that, maybe check for local marketplaces. So like check either like Craigslist or Kijiji, these kinds of places. There's lots and lots of looms available online for sale, used looms. And I've seen so many massive floor looms available, mostly around Ontario and Quebec area, because that's centered around where Leclerc Looms is in Canada. And so there's a lot of people with those older looms, and I just see them floating around all the time. So I would suggest that you ask for photos, ask for close-up photos, and get a really good sense of what that loom is like, what an older loom is like, before you try to buy it. Ideally, you want to see it in person if possible. I know that I was following up on a couple of loom listings, and when I started to get more up-close photos of them, I noticed that there was like discoloration of the wood, which I thought could have been mold, and so I was like, no, I don't want to bring that into my house. But some other looms have been preserved really well, kept in climate-controlled areas. Other looms have been left in garages and like been abandoned and not really treated very well. So you want to, make sure that what you're going to be getting is still workable and usable. Yeah, there's lots and lots of looms available. Now, the other thing you want to check is maybe look at the age of the loom. So for Leclerc, you can see there's like a history of how these looms have changed over time, and you can look at the logo, how new or old is the logo. Those are all dated. There's different features that have come up at different times of history. So you want to look into all of that, and it's just do a little bit of research into all of that. You want to know if maybe the manufacturer is still up and running. So luckily, Leclerc in Canada, it's it's still up and running, and you can get parts, you can get replacement parts, you can get manuals, you can get help, you can get support for this older loom. So that's one thing to consider as well. Yeah, and then think about how long it would take to restore it. So one of these loom listings that I was looking at, it was a loom that was probably close to 100 years old, maybe like 80 plus years old. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, oh, that's going to take a long time to restore. And then I thought, I just want to weave. I don't want to spend so much time trying to fix the loom. I'd like to spend more time weaving on the loom. And so decided that that wasn't going to be the best thing to do. But you can see here, there's a photograph here. This is a 36-inch wide Leclerc Artisan loom. It just happens to be a loom that is currently available. And I will put the link, I'll have to put the link somewhere. I'll put it maybe in the forums later. But you can also look on Craigslist right now. If you happen to be in Vancouver, this loom is available right now. And it's like available, yes, from these artist studios. So there's always kind of looms floating around and available. So Sig is saying, yeah, I got my 4-shaft from an estate sale. Ashley's saying I was able to get my loom by trading a knitting machine I was planning to get rid of. That's fantastic, doing a trade. Knitting machines. So I do have a PDF that we had put together a while back about how to buy a loom, and it gives you a couple of ideas, some things to think about, some considerations to make as you are looking for a loom to try to get. Oh, Amanda's saying, make sure that you have enough space for the loom you get. You need to have space around them in which to dress the loom. Yes, it's true. I find that I keep my looms in an area where I can kind of move them around as needed for warping, for sectional, for all sorts of things like that. So what I've done with a couple of the looms here is I put them on a small area rug, like a 4x6 area rug, and then I just kind of slide the rug around wherever I need it to go, and that's been really easy. I think it's been easy on the floor. So then, what to learn next? So in talking about, what we need to do in order to prepare for a weaving study group in January, these are the kinds of things that I want you to consider as you're practicing, as you're beginning to do your weaving. It's really being consistent, being solid and consistent about measuring your ends per inch against your picks per inch, and making sure that you're weaving that 50-50 balanced cloth. So you can maybe see in this area here, this beige area, this is all plain weave. And so if you go up really, really close with your measuring tape, you should be able to measure. It should be 20 ends per inch and 20 picks per inch in order to get a good cloth. And then from there, you want to learn to make good selvages, practice all of that kind of stuff, figuring out how much tension do you put on your warp, not so tight that it's like all being stretched, but not too loose that it's being floppy. So it's kind of figuring out where the tension is on your warp and where that should be. Also, if you're really good at working with one shuttle and doing a one shuttle weave, then the next step is to learn how to juggle 2 shuttles or maybe 3 shuttles, and how does that work? What is the order of where do these shuttles go, and how do they interlock on the salvage side, so that way you're not ending up with weird yarn being carried up the side and things like that. And so learning how to juggle and handle more than one shuttle is good. And then like I said, learning how to keep really good notes of all your work, measuring, just getting to the habit of measuring things on the loom, measuring things off the loom, and then measuring things after they've been washed and finished. And like I mentioned also about learning how to read and write your own weaving drafts will be very, very important. And then this photograph here is what I worked on the weekend, and that was learning overshot for the first time. And overshot is amazing. I have a video that I'm going to be editing this afternoon to come out tomorrow, but it's so cool. And so this is going to be the next topic that we will sort of tackle after the Twill stuff. Probably, I'm hoping, maybe midway through 2022, we can start talking about some overshot stuff, and maybe that would be the study group for the following year where we actually do it together. But overshot is so cool because it's basically the background of it all is plain weave, and then in between each plain weave pick is a twill pick. And so you're getting, you can see these are like twill diagonals. This is a 45-degree twill diagonal here, twill diagonal, and then the background behind it all is plain weave. It blows my mind. It's very exciting. So I want to explore more about that. And part of the reason, you guys will see this on Instagram. If you surf through Instagram, you'll see overshot being done in a really beautifully modern way. That's like fragments of overshot. And so the idea is kind of like you don't have to carry this weft yarn, this blue weft yarn, all the way from end to end. Like you don't have to carry it from selvage to selvage. You can just stop it partway through and then make it go back. And just, it's almost like, not the clasped warp and weft technique, but almost, yeah, it's basically you just don't take this blue yarn from end to end, from the selvage to selvage. And so you can create sort of fragments of overshot, and then you have this background of plain weave. It's beautiful and amazing. It's definitely something I want to explore more, because beyond using a cotton yarn for this weft, you can use hand spun for the weft, you can use wool yarn for the weft, you could use knitting yarn, you can use gradient yarn, you could use so many different variations for the weft, and there's a lot of possibilities. And especially since you have the stability of the ground cloth, whatever you're putting in there as weft yarn for the supplemental weft is very decorative. It doesn't have to provide the structure, it can just provide color. So lots and lots of very cool things to explore. Yes, Elena is saying, oh, look for the Crazy Shot book. Yes, and yeah, you can design stripes in overshot as well. No wonder, if you were to put stripes in the background, that might be a bit too much. Okay, yes, Amanda, like inlay. I'll have to like link to some Instagram pictures of this fragments of overshot idea. It's very, very cool. So also in the discussion forum, I wanted to highlight a couple of threads that have been coming up. And I also wanted to thank Vicky. Vicky's here, Victoria, in the chat right now. But Vicky has gone through over the past couple of weeks and done a whole bunch of organization of the forums. When we first started the forums, we didn't realize how big it was going to become, like how many discussions were going to happen or where the discussions were going to be. And so we created a framework that was based around each of the courses. And then the more we thought about it, it was like, well, what if we have like 60 courses or 100 courses? Like we're going to have like 100 sub forums of where to put all the conversations. And so we've reorganized it so that it's more topic based as opposed to course based. But each thread has also been tagged with the course name and the instructor name. So hopefully making things much easier to find in the forum. So big thank you to Vicky for doing that. So you can see this is kind of how things are organized now in the forum. So if you go under dyeing, you'll see topic of acid dyeing, fiber reactive dyeing, natural dyeing. If you go under knitting now, it's been grouped into cables and texture, into color work, into garments, knitting techniques, lace knitting, and sock knitting. So trying to find the big topics. As things change and evolve and continue to evolve in the community, we'll continue to sort of maintain and tidy and clean all of this kind of stuff to make sure that everybody can find what they need to find. So like if you're working on something on your rigid heddle loom and you need to ask a question, you'll know specifically that you have to go to the rigid heddle section. I want to also sort of highlight for you that there is an ongoing area of discussion, which is the discussion of the moment. And so if you are participating in Socktober, if you've been making a lot of socks in October, there's a thread there under the discussion of the moment. There's a Socktober thread. We were also talking about doing sort of smaller make-alongs, kind of like choosing a focus or like a theme where everybody's making something like socks in October, but in between these big, intense study group times to just have smaller things like if we're going to be making things for the holidays, or if we're going to be making holiday ornaments or whatever we're making around that time, to just have a smaller conversation about that. It doesn't have to be as full-blown as a study group. There's also a conversation here about space for dyeing. And I think it starts off saying, well, most of us don't have 2 kitchens to do dyeing in. What are the options? And I did want to highlight this because the member who asked the question was saying that she watched my safety in dyeing video, where I basically said, don't dye in your kitchen. You have to dye in a space that is away from food preparation. And I think she was a little bit nervous about how to proceed. And I think that it's good to be a little bit anxious, and it's good to be a little bit nervous, because the things that we are using for dyeing and the chemicals that we're using for dyeing are not meant to be around food. They're not meant to be ingested. They're not meant to be inhaled. And so I still feel very strongly that those chemicals and those materials and those tools that are required for dyeing not be done in your home kitchen. So if there's any way that you can do it outside, mix in a mixing box, so that way when the draft is blowing or a breeze is blowing, that dye powder is not going everywhere, but just to keep all of that kind of stuff really contained. And try to dye outside if you don't have a second kitchen. And so that's part of the reason why we do the dyeing study group in the summer, because that's the best time to be outside, to be doing a lot of these things. The next conversation here, there's a makeshift spinning through the rings. So I believe this was Amanda C. was talking about spinning through the rings or plying through the rings, and different ways of doing that kind of setup. I know that for myself, what I have is I use exactly the same thing that Katrina has shown in her class, the spinning up a level. She also talks about plying through the rings, and it's like a rack. It's a white rack that you can hang in your kitchen cabinet, where you put your sponges and soaps and things like that. And so it's got like a bit of a mesh basket to it, and then I hang that mesh basket either from a really high cabinet in my kitchen or like from the back of a chair or something like that, and then I've used that to ply through the rings. And then speaking about tools, I did get a question about using a ball winder and what to get, and so I'm going to show you. This is what I have. I've had this for maybe more than 15 years for sure. I don't think this brand is even made anymore. This is the Royal brand. I believe that this was, it's made in Japan. This ball winder is great, but it is fairly delicate. So I know my kids have used it and helped me wind balls, and when there's too much tension on here, it'll make a crack, 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 crack sound, which is not good because it means that the gears are being stripped inside. But you will find other ball winders that look very similar, but I don't feel like they are as good. They just fall apart more quickly. They don't align properly. They don't wind properly. So if this brand is not available, if I were to buy another one at this moment, I would buy something that's like a wooden ball winder. I know Ashford makes one that's a manual crank wooden ball winder. There's a couple of other manufacturers who've made wooden ball winders where there's like a drive band that's on the outside that can be replaced, and that's very, very helpful. All of that stuff. All of that stuff. So we do have an electric ball winder as well, but again, it sounds better than it actually is. It doesn't function as fast as you think it might, but it is nice to be able to set up an electric ball winder with something like lace weight yarn, and then you can walk away from it, because the lace weight yarn does take several minutes to wind. Amanda's saying mine is similar but also very old. It's a Singer brand, one that came with your knitting machine, your Nana's knitting machine from the 1960s or 70s. I really believe that investing in a really good ball winder is so helpful. So much of what we do with yarn and with weaving and with knitting is repackaging yarn all day long. So, to go from this format on a storage bobbin, and then I have to use a Swift in order to make it into a hank so that I can wash it, and then from there I'm going to have to put this back on the Swift and then use a ball winder to convert it into a ball so I can knit it. So all of these intermediate tools are actually really important. So I would say invest in the best things that you can possibly get. I've never heard of Stanwood, but I will look that up. Stanwood ball winder, which is a heavy duty one, and Vicky has a Strauch winder. That sounds fantastic too. Yeah. I think like a wooden one that's heavy duty, that's what I would encourage you to get. So let's talk about what you guys have made. I have to share this one with you. This one is actually Vicky's hand spinning. It's stunning. It's beautiful. So basically there's a thread here. You can go to this thread. It says blending colors to make them belong. And so she goes into a discussion about how she dyed these braids of BFL, but she didn't really like them as they were. And so she took them and broke them up into piles of different colors and then sort of pulled together the colors that were common in each of these things. So I think that there's one that's mostly pinks and purples. There's one that's like greens. There's one, oh yeah, greens and teals. There's one that's a little bit more golds, oranges, things like that. And then actually made these into Rolex. So I'm not sure if you used a blending board, Vicky. You didn't, I don't think you said, but you made them into Rolex and then used 3 passes to really blend the colors together. But spun them into 2-ply yarns. These are 20 wraps per inch, and they are just so beautiful. Okay, you used carders to make the Rolex. That's very, very handy. Fantastic. Hand carders, yes. Beautiful. I mean, I'm really curious what you're going to make with them now, but they look like they would be perfect for color work or something like that. So Angeline, it's not entirely like combo spinning because Vicky actually carded together all of the fiber to really blend the colors together and then made them into Rolex before actually spinning them. But you can see the intermediate photos if you go to this link here. I only have space for 2 photos, so I'm encouraging you to go to the forums to go see. I also wanted to post this photo. It's the wrong orientation, I know, but I wanted you to see that Robin, who's also one of the moderators in the school, she's starting to learn how to spin with supported spindles. And so she has here, this is a Tibetan spindle, so it's got the whirl on it, but also this is the tip that would sit in the bowl, and then this here is a Russian spindle, so it looks more like a paintbrush almost. And so this one also, so this is the bowl. I believe these are Helen's spindles, if I'm not mistaken, because this looks like the bowl that I have as well. Helen Maudsley, if you were in the chat, I think I saw you in the chat earlier. But yes, this is the bowl, and then she's also trying to use the bottom side of a teacup from her daughter's tea set, and using that to spin in. And so just really, it is Helen's. So Helen Maudsley, there you go. So these are made by Helen, which you can find at Maudsley Fiber Arts. And yes, so just learning and exploring how supported spindling works, and she's working with some Corriedale fiber. I think that this would be really something fun to do with Rolex that you could make off of hand carders. That would work really, really well. So I'm excited to see where this all goes. And then someone earlier in the chat, I have to scroll back up to see, but someone was asking about doing twill or twill on a rigid heddle loom. And while the class that we're going to be doing in January, or the Weaving Twills class that's coming out next week, is not done on a rigid heddle loom, it is absolutely possible to do twill on a rigid heddle loom. It's just a little complicated, but it can be done. And so this is why I wanted to share with you this amazing scarf project by Elle-Marie. So her husband requested a scarf, and this is a Kennedy tartan scarf, and it's woven on her rigid heddle loom here. You can see this Ashford rigid heddle loom. You can see she's using 3 heddles, in order to get the twill, because the twill is not a 2-2 twill, the twill is a 2-1 twill fabric. She's using the Jagerspun Zephyr, which is a beautiful, beautiful yarn, but it's fine. It's like a 218 yarn, and so you would set it typically at about 24 ends per inch. And so she has it set here 25 ends per inch by using these 3 heddles. I think each of these heddles was like 7.5, I think she said, but it is phenomenal. In order for her to, you can go to the post to read how she did it. So you can see there's some magnets here. And so I believe she glued some of these magnets on so that way when she moved one of the heddles, she could make it snap to the other heddle to keep it out of the way so that she could work with this heddle. And so, yeah, it sounds a little bit complicated managing and juggling 3 heddles, because you can see on the Ashford rigid heddle, there's space for 2 heddles. There's no space for a 3rd heddle. And so you can see she's got it clamped. She's got this 3rd heddle clamped to this bar here in order to get it out of the way. So this is all, there's a lot of engineering to figure it out, to figure out how to make it work. But she has totally made it work, and it's beautiful. Like, these are perfectly square. Like the beat here is beautiful. Yeah, genius, right? So I had to share this with you just so that you know that it definitely is possible. It's a little bit tricky to figure out, but she's done it. It's totally possible. This scarf is beautiful, and I just wanted to share it because I like the colors. But this is Catherine S. Catherine is doing the, she's using the Lighthouse colorway in the Tough Love sock, and rather than doing it super, super warp-faced, she's doing it more like a balanced plain weave. And using a skein of lace weight Juniper Moon in navy color. And so this one, when it washes up, it's going to be a lot more open, it's going to be a lot more drapey, and this is going to be a shawl. So it's very, very lovely. And then I think she said that for her next project, she might explore doing more of the warp-faced look and feel, but for the first one, she wanted to see how this one goes. But it looks really beautiful just like that, because I like how it's wider. It's not a scarf that's a little bit skinnier, but it's wider, and then with the multiple skeins you can see these shifts of color. It's looking very, very cool. And finally we have Ruth. Ruth is knitting some socks that these are the October twist socks. These are designed by Matt Akers, and because it's Socktober, she was making some socks, and she decided to knit them 2 at a time. And I can see that, yeah, definitely. So this is a circular needle, and then here's one loop, and then here's the other needle, and here's the other loop going here. And so the 2 socks are attached on one circular needle, and she's knitting these 2 up at a time. We had, I think, someone request maybe like a tutorial or a lesson on how to knit socks 2 up at a time. I don't know if anybody here is interested in that. I'm more than welcome to entertain ideas about how we teach socks next. We are always kind of trying to do socks in October, and we're thinking about what to do for next October, whether that's 2 at a time, which seems like a long time to wait for something like that. Next year we were maybe talking about doing heel and toe variations for various socks and things like that, but we're totally open to ideas, and always happy to talk about what you guys want to learn. But those socks are looking really lovely, Ruth. And finally, we're going to do the giveaway for this month. This month's giveaway is actually going to be 3 cones of this yarn, of beam. So 3 cones of beam. You can choose the same colors or different colors, and the 3 cones of beam will work to make the twill gamp. So if you want to weave the twill gamp, start with 3 cones of beam and you are ready to go. So you can go to this link. It should be available and live right now. So schoolofsweetgeorgia.com/liveoct 2021, and the question is basically like, we're going to be planning our dyeing study group for next summer, and I'm interested to hear what aspect of dyeing we should focus on. I think it's really important that we focus on one thing that we can all explore very much in depth together. And so I would love to hear about what your ideas are about what we should do with dyeing. I know many people came to the school initially because we were teaching dyeing, and so now we want to explore a little bit more, but we need to be really specific about what we're going to do with dyeing. So that question is available, and that giveaway is going to be open until midnight tonight. And that is the end of our time today. So yes, I left the link here again in case anybody needs that slide still, but this is the link for the giveaway, live Oct 2021. And then otherwise, this is all of our contact information. This is where you can find us, our websites at SweetGeorgiaYarns.com, theschoolofsweetgeorgia.com, and then also on Instagram at both of those, and then where you can email us if you need to. But for the most part, if you have questions about anything that's happening in or around the school, I welcome you to ask the questions in the forum, because very often people can help answer the question sooner than I can get to my email. Fantastic. It's so nice to see everybody here today, and very, very cool. And yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. So we'll do this again next month. Until then, have a wonderful time, and I will see you guys in the forums. All right, bye for now.